Okay, welcome to lecture number 1. I am Jenny Ernst, and I'm going to be your professor this semester. I plan to record all of the lectures so that you have something to go along with the text. It's important for me to explain the concepts to you, especially if this is like the first time you've taken a philosophy course. There are a lot of words that you think you understand what they mean, but once you start to really sort of analyze them as concepts, they don't really kind of make as much sense as you thought. So it's important for you to listen and to watch. You don't have to watch my face, and frankly, I wouldn't want to watch my face. But yeah, at least listen to the lectures every week and follow along with your lecture outline, because I'm going to be using the lecture outline in every one of my videos. So I'm going to just go through it and explain things. So the outline is not as detailed, though, as my lecture will be. So I would highly recommend that you don't just read the outline. Okay. All right. Good. So I've noticed that there's a reflection in my glasses. Oh my goodness. The light is reflecting in my glasses and you can't see my eyes. Or it's like, I'm obviously not great at this. Okay. So I'm going to take my glasses off. I really don't want to because I can't see anything, but hopefully that's a little bit better for the folks at home. Okay, so I usually give a little bit of a spiel about what philosophy is on the first day of class, so I'm going to go ahead and just tack that on to the introductory lecture. So some of you may have had a philosophy course before. That's great. Then you're going to be right at home here. But for those of you who have never had a philosophy course, you've probably heard the term philosophy. It's thrown around a lot. Everybody has a philosophy, right? So it's not clear exactly what philosophy is, right? So people use that word in lots of different ways. So the way that we're going to be using it in this course, how do I keep this from going on sleep? This is so annoying. Sorry. I hope you're laughing along with me. If not, feel free to laugh at me. I really am not good at this video thing. Okay, so philosophy. What is it, right? So everybody has sort of there's like a colloquial notion of what philosophy is. People throw the word around a lot. It's like, what's your personal philosophy? And usually when people say that, they mean something like, what do you believe about life? What's your purpose in life? How do you go about doing your business, right? I mean, some people are like, look, empathy is part of my personal philosophy. Okay, that's fantastic. And other people are like, well, you know, if you're a philosopher, an actual professional philosopher, you're like, yeah, well, you know, empathy is just part of like morality. So good, you want to live a moral life. I am happy for you, right? So, but when we're talking about academic philosophy, it has a very particular definition. It has a very particular, there's a very particular methodology that goes along with it. So it's not just like getting stoned, although I do know some philosophy professors who do this. I don't think they do it professionally. I hope they don't. But anyway, it's not just getting stoned and sitting around thinking about whatever happens to pop into your mind when you're baked, right? It seems like when you're baked, you're having these really deep thoughts, and people tend to associate philosophy with really deep thoughts, right? So sometimes people think that there's a correlation there between things like drug use or whatever and sitting around having profound or deep thoughts. That's not academic philosophy. Academic philosophy is a discipline that is very much like science. It's a very analytical discipline. So the tool set that we use is very analytical. So you're going to find that, yes, we're going to grapple with things that are deep thoughts, so to speak, but the way that we're going to do it is not by just zoning out and contemplating our navel. We're going to actually be looking at a very interesting part of the world, right? So like a scientist is going to identify a particular part of the world that they're interested in studying. Okay, so suppose that you're interested in squids. Why not, right? Squids are cool. I really like cephalopods. They're so smart. Okay, so But so suppose you want to study squid, certain kind of squid. You're going to have a certain tool set. Like, biologists have a very specific tool set that they use for gathering data and analyzing data and then developing theories about their particular view, their particular item that they're interested in or the subject that they're interested in. Philosophy is very disciplined. It's very much the same way. So we are examining parts of the world, just like scientists are examining parts of the world. But the parts of the world that we're interested in are very abstract parts of the world, right? So there is an abstract level to the world. It's not the case that just because something's abstract, it doesn't exist. I mean, it does exist, right? Concepts, abstract entities, like the concept of a dog. Does the concept exist? Well, yeah, it's an abstract entity, but it does exist, right? So we're studying things that exist, but we're not studying things in an empirical way. So we're not using scientific methodology, although philosophers are responsible for developing the scientific method. We use the same tool set, but we apply it to a different subject matter. Okay, so the things that philosophers study, it's not just this subjective rambling and pondering and pontificating about things. We're actually looking at an interesting part of the world that consists of abstract entities, and we're using a tool set that is very similar and in some ways exactly the same tool set that scientists use. Okay, so this is what philosophy is. It's a discipline. And when I say empirical, I'm just talking about anything empirical is just something that you can explore with your five senses, right? So experience, like anything that you can experience in the world, right? So here's my cup. I've got some yummy tea in here, which I'm going to drink. Okay, it's good. Okay, so here's my cup, and if I can see it's got a color, right? So I'm not colorblind. I can tell it's got a color. But even if I was colorblind, I could still tell that there's something here. There's an object. I can see it, and I can feel it. There's some solidity to it. There's a smell. It smells like mint because it's got mint tea in it, right? So I can hear it. So I can gather information, I can gather data about things in the world by using my five senses, right? So anything that we can study using our five senses or machines, technology that helps extend our senses, like telescopes, microscopes, right? Like all of scientific equipment is basically a way for us to extend the reach, to extend the scope of our senses, right? So science is an empirical domain. It's done through observation. Philosophy is a discipline like science, but it's not empirical. We can use empirical data when we're making our arguments, but the discipline itself is not empirical. We don't go out and examine the world, right? So if I want to know what justice is, I don't go out in the world and find justice and then look at it. Usually what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to figure out, what do I just kind of get a baseline level? What do I think justice is, right? And we do a lot of discussion, right? So philosophy involves a lot of dialogue back and forth. If you have an image of a philosopher like Plato or Aristotle or Descartes, any of these really famous philosophers who are also rich white men who didn't have anything to do all day except, lay in bed and think, it looks like, from the way that history is presented to us, it looks like these guys just developed these brilliant ideas in a vacuum, right? They just came up with these ideas all by themselves, and wow, wasn't that just brilliant? Well, that's false. Not one of them came up with any of that stuff all on their own. Not only did they have a thorough understanding of all of the scholars and their theories that had gone before them, but they also were parts of academic communities where they shared their theories with other philosophers and other academics and got a lot of feedback, right? And then they would respond to the objections. So this is something that you don't get the history of when you think about these really brilliant philosophers. You think of these guys just doing this really heady brain work in a vacuum, and that's not philosophy. Philosophy is a dialogue, right? So if I want to know what justice is, I'm going to sort of maybe lay out a sort of like a beginning definition, right? So here's just this what do I want to call it? All the words that are coming to my mind are Latin words. We use a lot of Latin words when you get into the the crazy levels of philosophy. Something just that you can take at face value, just like this simple definition. What is justice, right? Giving people what they deserve. Okay, so that's a simple, easy definition that I can give, right? And then I'm going to sort of start to analyze things that I think might be justice, but maybe don't quite fit that definition. Then I'm going to adjust my definition, right? Until I can kind of get a theory of justice. But I'm also going to talk to other people because other people have different perspective, right? So we want to look at an issue from all of these different angles. And so the more people that we talk to, the more people that we share our ideas with, the more people that we dialogue with, the more likely we are to come up with a theory that's a really good theory that actually explains something in the world. So there are some branches of philosophy that seem like they're so abstract, how could they possibly explain anything in the world? But they do. They're just very abstract entities, right? So what we want to do is very much like what scientists do. We want to explore and explain certain phenomena. And in order to get a good explanation, you have to get good data. And getting good data means getting a lot of different opinions from people, right? So one of the things that we do is we do a lot of conceptual analysis. So like I just did, I say, here's justice, here's this concept. It's attached to a word, right? So it's more than just a word. And a concept is not really just the definition of a word. It's more than that. It's like a theory, right? It's like this compact theory, right? So if you go to the dictionary and you look up the definition of a word, you're not looking at the concept. You're just looking at how we use the word in English. But there's something else going on there cognitively, right? You've got all of this information associated with justice, and that's part of the concept. Okay, your brain is going to deploy all that information every time you use that concept. So one of the things that my brain is always going to, or at least recently, very recently, I have got a little gnat flying around. I have a duck, and he attracts gnats because he's just so hot, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, tangent. I even do that on video. I do that in class, and I also am finding I'm doing it on video. You're getting the full experience here. What was I talking about? Except the problem is now I don't have anybody here to like remind me what I was talking about. Please, somebody, send me a telepathic message. You're not even listening. So, what the hell? I could stop the video and go back, but then I would mess the whole thing up. Concepts. Good. So, recently, if you say justice, what's going to pop into my head, boom, just like that is no justice, no peace, right? Because there's been a social movement, a very, very vocal, very active social movement across the United States that where people are really sort of digging into justice issues, right? And injustice. Like if you're familiar with what injustice is and you have a better idea of how you can back your way into a notion of what justice is. So we're working toward that. You have to have an idea of what you're working toward. So I'm going to analyze. So analyzing concepts is part of what we do in philosophy because there are theories. Like concepts are like little. It's hard to explain. I'll get into it more as we go along and as we look at particular specific concepts. But the idea is this: it's like you have a zip file. Okay, so think about it like a computer file. So you've got a file that's got a lot of information, right? So I've got this notion of justice, and I also have a theory about what justice is and all the ways in which justice is interconnected with various other things in my mind, right? So these are cognitive entities. Again, this is philosophy. We're studying things inside our heads. We're studying abstract entities out in the world. But when we're talking about concepts, we're talking about entities that are inside our heads, right? So these are cognitive phenomena. It's like a file where you store a bunch of information that's related to that, notion, like the concept just is that file, right? So, but you have like a zip file. So when I say justice, I'm saying a word, and you might know how we use that word in English, right? So that's the dictionary definition. But in my mind, there's this zip file attached to that word. And in order to sort of get at what is the theory of justice that is sort of embedded in our culture and that I have learned, we have to unzip that file. So conceptual analysis is like unzipping a zipped up file. That's it. And then really looking at what's in there, right? What is all this information? And how do we know that it's reliable? And, what do we do if different people have different ideas, right? How do we resolve these conflicts? So this is pretty much the way we do philosophy. Now, because it is actually a very analytical discipline, right? So we're doing a lot of analyses, right? So when we unzip these files, we start looking at what's in there. We're looking at the connections between a bunch of things. And in order to track the connections between a bunch of things, you have to have a specific kind of tool set. So what we use logic and reasoning. And these are rule-based disciplines, right? So logic, there are rules of logic that you have to follow. Now, I'm not going to give you a whole ton of logic. I don't want to give you too much stuff because this isn't a logic class and you don't really need a high level of understanding in logic to do this course. But there are some things you do need to know because we're going to be doing the philosophical methodology in this class, and if you don't know it, then you're going to be lost. So this is where your supplemental notes, so there's a supplemental notes that I posted on the website. This is where the supplemental notes come in, so if you've already got those, you can pull them up and follow along. Okay, so I'm going to start with just some basic conceptual stuff. Okay, so first thing, statement. What is a statement? Well, here's something that you're going to find out. It depends on what discipline, right? If you're an English literature major, the word statement might mean something completely different than if you're a logician, right? So there's a logical definition of what a statement is. And that's the definition that I care about. So when you're learning this conceptual framework for doing philosophical methodology, you need to make sure that you're learning the logic definitions for these terms, right? So a statement in logic has a logical definition, and it is just a sentence that can be either true or false. Okay? A statement is a sentence that can be either true or false. Okay? On the quiz, you're going to be asked to identify whether or not something is a statement, and people frequently make this mistake. Is this a statement? This is where I wish I could interact with you. Is this a statement? The number of atoms in the universe is an even number. Is that a statement? Remember, a statement is something that can be either true or false. Now, here's where people get hung up. How would you ever know whether or not the number of atoms in the universe at any given moment is an even number? I don't think that that's something that that's humanly possible to know. But that's not, whether or not we can know something is not what makes it a statement. What makes it a statement is whether or not it can be either true or false. So surely the world is such that it is either true or false that the number of atoms in the universe at any given time is either an even number or an odd number. Like that's a statement that can be either true or false, even if it's something we can never know. Okay, so what makes a statement true or false is the way the world is, right? Not what we know about it. Okay, so you need to make this distinction. In philosophy, we call this a distinction between metaphysics and epistemology. I don't want to use those big words with you, so forget that I just said that. But what's important is the way the world is, right? So how things are in the world, just the way things exist. the whole, when I say world, I mean, when philosophers say world, this is a type of logic that we are not ever going to be exposed to, I hope. It's torture. But when we say world, we don't mean planet Earth. We mean everything that exists, right? So a world in logic is a complete and total state of affairs. So that includes the entire universe. So when I say world, I mean that. Okay, that's a logic notion. So the way that the world is, right, the total state of affairs for everything that exists in this universe, that's what is going to determine whether or not a statement is true or false. Okay, so we want our statements. We want our, what we're going to get into. You'll understand what I mean by this, but we want to track the world. We're interested in studying the world, right? We're interested in studying phenomena that happens either abstractly or even concretely. So we want everything that we say to be able to map onto some part of the world. So that's all it means for a statement to be true, is that it accurately represents some state of affairs in the world. Okay? That's the way we're going to be using it. I mean, that's the most popular theory in philosophy, so that's the one we're going to use. Okay? If you ever get into majoring in philosophy and taking some other classes, you'll realize that there are other people who define things a little bit differently. But this is the predominant view, and this is especially the view that we teach at the undergraduate level. Okay, so now statements are important because we use them to track the world. Right? Here's a statement. This is a coffee cup. Right? Have I said something true? How would you know? Right? So that statement that this is a coffee cup can be true even if you are not in a position to know whether or not this is actually a coffee cup or if it's just some holographic illusion that I have conjured with my philosopher magic. Woo! Right? Okay, so I could also say there's a duck sitting on my chair right over there. That's a statement. It's either true or false. You don't know. Okay? But what makes it true is not whether or not you know, it's that there is actually a duck sitting on my chair. He lives in the house. Okay, right, good. All right, so I feel like I'm beating a dead horse there. I just want people get very confused about the difference between the way the world is and whether or not we can know the way the world is, right? So make sure you keep that really distinct. It's really important because when we start getting into more complicated ideas that we're analyzing, it's going to be really important to remember that distinction, right? Because sometimes you can get really confused. All right, so here's another word. This is another term. This is again, it's a logic term, and I want you to understand the logic term. The term is premise. A premise is a statement that provides evidence for the truth of a conclusion. Okay, so we use argumentation format in philosophy, and when I say argumentation, I don't mean like like arguing and yelling and fuck you and I hate your guts, right? Okay, whatever, like drama. Okay, drama. No. Put that to the side. We don't. we want to contain the drama. Okay, so drama out. What we mean by argument is a type of debate. And again, when I say debate, I don't mean like high school style debate club, okay? Or Ben Shapiro style debate. Debate me, right? That is not what I'm talking about, okay? That is not what we do. Again, we're more like scientists than anything, right? Philosophy is more like a social science than it is like any of these other things. Okay, so when we use argumentation format, it's a method of reasoning, right? It's a very precise method of reasoning. So where you've got premises and then a conclusion, right? So all argument format is going to have a set of premises and then a conclusion. And the premises, everything in an argument, both the premises and the conclusion, They are statements, okay? And only statements. We're only interested in sentences that can be true or false. Truth is really important in this process of reasoning. So we have premises that are going to provide evidence. So something is a premise if it provides evidence for a conclusion, right? So you have a set of statements. An argument is just a set of statements. And it's a set of statements that has a special relationship between those statements, right? So the premises really shouldn't be connected to each other, right? You shouldn't have a premise that provides evidence for another premise. That's not a good argument. That's not a well-structured argument. All of the premises bear a relation to the conclusion, but not necessarily to each other, okay? So you want to make sure that when you're crafting an argument, that you always have that evidential relation between the premise and the conclusion, all right? So if you've done science, think about it this way. You've got your data, and your data is going to support a particular hypothesis, right? So you've got data points, which are premises that provide evidence for the conclusion, okay? Here's an argument. Okay, first premise. Again, you can follow along on your notes. It's probably a good idea for you to do that. So stars, first premise, stars are massive thermonuclear reactions in space. Okay. Premise 2, our sun is a massive thermonuclear reaction in space. Conclusion, therefore our sun is a star. Okay, so you can see that these two premises don't provide support for one another, but they do provide support for the conclusion, right? They provide evidence for the conclusion. So if somebody says our sun is a star, so if I just walked up to you and I said, hey, guess what? Our sun is a star. Well, you're probably going to be like, well, yeah, no shit, Sherlock, right? I mean, that's shit you learn when you're in kindergarten. But in philosophy, we don't take anything for granted. So if somebody came up to me and said, guess what? Our sun is a star, and we're in a philosophical context, right? We have our philosophy hats on, and we're going to do philosophy. We're going to be very skeptical of everything. We're going to say, well, how do you know? What evidence do you have for that claim? I need you to provide me with some evidence for that claim, okay? And so what you're asking for is you're asking for somebody to provide you with premises for that conclusion. If somebody just walks up to you and says the sun is a star, that's not a conclusion. It's just a statement. But once you engage them in dialogue and you say, now, wait a minute, I need you to provide some reasons for me to believe that that's true, right? What's your evidence? Then suddenly that claim is going to become a conclusion, and whatever evidence that person provides you with are your premises, okay? So we actually do this all the time. If we're at all having any sort of disagreement about a particular matter, say political matter or social matter, right? Suppose we're trying to figure out, oh no, my lights just went off. Why? Why did my lights go off? Oh, Jesus. That's awful. Ugh. I can tell you what, this is like Keystone Cops. All right, I'm gonna get this. I'm gonna figure out how to do this without blinding everybody. I've got these lights like taped up on my computer. All right. Yes. Ooh. My goodness. All right. This needs to go. Do these have like a timer on? Fuck if I know. All right. Sorry, the language. I'm a philosopher. We swear a lot. All right. I don't even know where we were. Fuck. Okay, so suppose that we are trying to have a discussion with a family member about whether or not transgender people should be allowed to use whatever bathroom they want to use. Okay, so this is actually, this is a discussion that people have. I don't know why, but they do. It seems pretty obvious to me that people should be able to use whatever bathroom they want to. Okay, seems obvious to me, right? But that doesn't mean that that claim is true. Just because it seems like it's true to you doesn't mean that it is true. So if I'm going to dialogue with somebody who disagrees with me, I'm going to have to come up with reasons. right? So so that's the hard part of doing philosophy sometimes is it just seems really obvious to me that somebody who's transgender should be able to use the bathroom that they feel comfortable in. I don't see a problem with it, right? All right, I'm pretty liberal. I pink hair, right? I'm sure that, you know, it's a dead giveaway. Sorry, I was going to say something about conservative men complaining about women with colored hair, but I don't want to get into that. Okay, so it seems really obvious to me that a transgender person should be able to use whatever restroom they feel comfortable in. But if somebody disagrees with me and they're like, yeah, I'm sorry, but I disagree with you. And then I say, why do you disagree with me? They're going to give me their reasons. And then I have to figure out what are my reasons, right? So why do I think that that a transgender person should be able to use whatever bathroom they want? Well, what are the reasons why people think they shouldn't? That's probably where I would start. Right? It's hard to provide evidence for a claim unless there's some sort of counter, right? So somebody says, well, what if somebody is just going to pretend to be a woman and go in the women's restroom and molest children? It's like, okay, well, that's possible. How probable is it, though, right? So there are easier ways for pedophiles to do what they do. Right, so I'm going to start with looking at their evidence, and then I'm going to sort of say, okay, here's how my idea is related to your, is different from your idea. It has to do with what kind of evidence we find plausible, right? So I find it implausible. I find it statistically unlikely, right, that that's going to happen. If we're just talking about the realm of possibility, anything's possible. That's a wide range of things. Anything's possible. I mean, Barack Obama could be a monkey, not a monkey, like a space. I was thinking about that space monkey who's got like the green, who's green. So Barack Obama, it's possible that Barack Obama is an alien, right? Okay, that's possible. How probable is it? I want to say that's very, very improbable. Right? So when I'm looking at this person's evidence, I'm going to sort of just assess, how good do I think this evidence is? When we do this, we have to take our emotions kind of out of it. Because what we're doing is we're analyzing. We want to kick in the analytical parts of our brain. And we want to say, all right, I'm going to just look at this person's evidence. I'm going to see, is this good evidence? Is this not good evidence? Okay? So an argument is only as good as the evidence that a person provides for their conclusion. So suppose that somebody said, well, the reason I think that transgender people should not be allowed to use the bathroom that makes them the most comfortable is because being transgender is abnormal. Well, that's a loaded statement, first of all, right? But it doesn't seem to support the conclusion, right? It doesn't seem to have anything to do with why a person should be in a particular bathroom. That just that evidence doesn't support that conclusion. So that's a terrible argument. And I'm going to say to the person, that's a bad argument. You're going to have to provide me with some evidence, some actual evidence that supports this conclusion, not just, some response, just some off the top of your head response, right? Like, oh, well, that's just abnormal. Well, that's really loaded. You could unpack that too and have a whole discussion about whether or not it's abnormal, right? And what is abnormal? What is abnormal? In certain domains, there's no such thing as normal, right? I mean, I study the brain, so I do a lot of cognitive science stuff in the area of philosophy that I'm interested in. Requires me to do a lot of cross-disciplinary work, and so when you start talking about what's going on inside your head, there's a lot of stuff that's just not typical or normal. So saying what's abnormal, by definition, to what's normal is just. It can't be done. Not really. Not when you're talking about cognitive stuff, but some cognitive stuff you can, right? But the point is, I'm rambling. God, I have a tendency to do this. This is why I need students to keep me on track. The point is, when we engage with each other, we're engaging with the evidence, right? So you don't want to just say, I think your conclusion is bad. and I'm just not going to talk to you, unfriend, right? Well, you can do that if you don't want to fuck around with people on social media, because a lot of them just get on there to troll. Okay. But if you really have an issue that you have to work out, or you're going to be a philosopher and you have to sort of like, analyze the stuff, you don't want to just say, okay, I don't like your conclusion, that's stupid. You want to say, I don't like your conclusion because the evidence that you used to support your conclusion is bad, and here's why, right? So you have to give an explanation for why their evidence isn't any good. Right? So a good argument is one that has where the premises are true. Okay? You can't use false premises in an argument to support the conclusion. How can a false premise provide evidence for anything? It can't, right? So an argument's only good if you've got true premises that are connected to the conclusion in a relevant way. So just saying, well, transgender people are abnormal, so they shouldn't be able to use the bathroom that they want. That claim, that premise, transgender people are abnormal, therefore they shouldn't be able to use the bathroom. Okay, that doesn't support the conclusion, right? So that's a bad argument. Suppose somebody gave you the argument that, God, I'm trying to think of an argument that would be decent but has a false premise. I always have to pick like the most difficult ones. I'm like, let's talk about transgenderism, and then trying to come up with arguments about it. Okay, so suppose somebody says the conclusion that they want to argue for is that transgender individuals should not be allowed to use the bathroom that makes them feel the most comfortable. And they say that that their supporting evidence is that transgender people are pedophiles, okay? That they're sexual deviants, let's put it that way. Not pedophiles, but sexual deviants. So a lot of people have this misconception that transgender individuals are sexual deviants. So they're sexually deviant, and because the bathroom is like a place where, people, can get away with doing sexually deviant things, it's not a good idea to put sexually deviant people into the bathroom with the opposite sex. Okay. That's not a good argument. And it's not a good argument because, even though you can fiddle with those premises and get them to support the conclusion, it's not a good argument because the claim that transgender people are sexual deviants is false. That's just false. That was a misconception, and it's still a misconception. But it is an old theory that is being overturned by substantial empirical data, even though it still persists in society. That's just false, right? So that's a bad argument because the evidence is not evidence. It's a false claim. Okay. So a good argument is going to have premises that support the conclusion, and they're going to be true. All right. I would normally be writing on the board, and that would help me stay, more focused. But okay, so this is the point at which I would say, do you have any questions? Does this make sense? But since we're doing this as a recording, I can't do that. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to transition into, sorry, I keep getting messages on my phone. I'm going to transition then into the material, okay? So I hope that what I just rambled on and on about for 40 minutes makes sense. This is stuff that I would do on the first day of class, and it would probably be a little bit more precise because, when I write things on the board, it's a lot easier for me, but here we are. Okay, so ethics. Let's transition then into ethics. I need a drink. This is not alcohol. I wish. I don't think I could lecture while drinking. I get a little bit goofy and sort of off track anyway. I think if I tried drinking while lecturing, I would probably be a massive disaster. All right, I'm gonna have my nicotine. I haven't smoked in years, but I'm addicted to nicotine, so whatever. To each their own, right? All right. Chapter 1. So let's talk about ethics. Now, ethics is one of the three major branches of philosophy. Um, I'm not going to get into detail about all the branches of philosophy. There are a lot of them. For every discipline, there's a philosophy of that thing, right? So math, there's philosophy of math. Biology, there's philosophy of biology, right? So language, philosophy of language. Philosophy of mind. There are tons and tons of subdisciplines in philosophy. And they're coming up, they're inventing new ones every day, right? So all you have to do is then put a meta in front of something. So you've got ethics, and then you've got meta-ethics. You've got metaphysics, and you've got meta-metaphysics. It's the proliferation of subdisciplines in philosophy is like a cottage industry. But anyway, we're just going to be talking about ethics. It's one of the three major branches of philosophy. There's a whole lot that goes under it. But ethics is really just the study of good, bad, right, and wrong. We're interested in ideas about basically, ethics is basically a study of human behavior. It's not psychology in that sense, but psychology is a discipline that studies the way people do behave, right? We're going to go out, we're going to do some research, and we're going to figure out how do people behave, right? So here's a way that most people behave. Most people are going to claim that they're a lot more moral than they actually are. People really believe of themselves that they are really upstanding, fine folk, and the data says, no, that's false, right? So again, these are empirical claims because they're claims about the way the world is, the way people are, and that's the domain of psychology. The domain of philosophy, of ethics, philosophical ethics, is the way things ought to be, right? So ethics is going to tell us not how we do behave, but how we ought to behave. And you have to sort of do a lot of work to figure out how ought we to behave toward one another. Now, there are a lot of different domains that tell us how we ought to behave. The law, just the basic law. Traffic laws tell you how you ought to behave. You ought not speed. I do. I can't help it. I've got lead foot. Speeding in my car is just, I love it. I like fast cars. Really, really like fast cars. My mom had a Corvette. Oh, that thing was just beefy. Anyway. Okay, so I shouldn't speed. I shouldn't get super excited about fast cars because, they're dangerous. I should not pick my nose in public. I should chew with my mouth closed. I should respect elders, right? I shouldn't just walk up to old ladies on the street and kick their canes out from underneath them, or their walkers, right? Take their walkers away. That would be cruel, right? So that's a social norm, but it's also a moral norm. But what I'm getting at is there are lots of different rules in society that tell us how we ought to behave. But they have different properties, right? What do I mean by that? Well, there are some rules that you can adhere to if you want to, but you don't have to, right? So if you want to be Jewish, then you will go to the synagogue, supposing you weren't already born Jewish, but suppose that you wanted to convert to Judaism. You want to live under Jewish law. So you go to the synagogue, you go through the thing with the rabbi, and you convert, go through that whole process. And you're choosing to put yourself under the rules structure of a religion. And it's not just a religion, it's a culture, right? So you become embedded in a culture that has lots and lots of norms, right? But the religious norms are some that really govern and really shape Jewish culture. But that's a choice. Even people who are born Jewish have a choice of whether or not they're going to be religious and whether or not they're going to let religious law govern their lives, right? So that's a choice. You might think that certain forms of etiquette, that's a choice, right? And etiquette rules don't apply to everybody. So there's a whole, I don't know if you know this is crazy. Just a life that I would not want to live. The royal family in Britain, there's like a book of rules that they have to follow that covers everything from how they're supposed to stand in public, whether or not they touch their spouse in public, what their clothing looks like. I mean, it is They have a book that governs every fucking thing these people do. All right, well, yay, those rules don't apply to all of us, right? We don't have to participate in that. If you don't play a sport, you don't have to follow those rules, okay? So there are a lot of rules in society that we don't have to follow if we don't want to. We just don't. Yay, right? I like that. I don't like having too many rules. And then there are some rules that there's just a lot of social pressure to conform to, right? So an example of a rule that there's a ton of social pressure to conform to is to behave according to your gender identity. I've been doing a lot of research on gender issues and transgenderism, so these are the things that are in my head right now. I don't usually talk about all this stuff, but this is, part of my interest in research right now. So, so you're going to get bombarded with, social justice issues. Sorry, it is an ethics class, though. And this is not as bad as it used to be, right? But I'm old. I'm guessing I'm older than most of you in this class. So I still remember a time when it was, still not great for women out there, right? It's better than it used to be, but there's still a lot of pressure to conform to a certain way of behaving for women. Same thing for men, right? These traditional gender norms, there's so much pressure. You don't have to behave that way, right? You can be gender transgressive all you want to, but you're going to pay the price socially, and especially in certain places, right? There are just certain places in the United States, if you're gender transgressive, you do not want to go there because there's going to be violent social sanctioning if you step outside of that traditional gender expression, okay? So these are rules that there's coercive force behind them, right? So if you don't follow those rules, something bad might happen to you. People are going to sanction you. They're going to do bad things to you. Okay, so there's a lot of pressure to conform, even though they're technically not things that you're required to do. So I'm kind of running through a spectrum here. So on this side, we have like rules of etiquette, right? You can choose to do that or not or whatever. You can be a total heathen. Who cares, right? Most of us, in today's society, we're not like Miss Manners, right? That's just not the way we are anymore. So etiquette rules are kind of over here. You can take them or leave them. Rules of games are also over here. If you play the game, then you got to play by the rules. Unless you're the Astros, then fuck the rules, right? Let's cheat. But sorry, do I have any students who like baseball? You'll get that reference. Okay, so you've got rules of games. You've got ethics, right? Not ethics. God, etiquette. God, ethics is it's on that side. Okay, so over here we have things. Yeah, you can take it or leave it. Doesn't really you don't have to do it. And then in the middle we've got things like social norms where you don't really have to do it, but if you don't do it, very bad things could happen to you, right? And in some ways that's getting better. But in a lot of ways, it's still crap, okay? So there's that. And then there's sort of in the middle here where there's a lot of coercive force or coercive pressure to behave according to a certain set of norms. You've got the law, right? So we're coerced into obeying the law. And coercion just means that there are going to be really negative consequences for us if we don't. So the law does apply to you. You can choose not to obey it. But there's a little bit more. So I would say social norms are right here. Law is a little bit more over here. Like those rules do apply to you. If you're in the state of Ohio, there are certain rules that apply to you that are not going to apply to you once you cross the border. So they do apply to you. You can choose not to obey them, right? But they do apply to you. It's not like you can opt out of it. If you're going to be in Ohio, you cannot opt out of those rules. They apply to you, period. And you're going to be held accountable for those rules even if you don't know them, right? So that's a little more strict over here than etiquette or even just certain kinds of social norms. And then way over on the other side over here, the strictest kind of norms that we have are moral norms. Moral norms are the kind of norms that apply to you no matter what, right? I got to pull up my notes. Moral norms are going to apply to you in the same way that laws of Ohio apply to you. You can't get out from underneath them. As long as you're in human, as long as you're in human form. Now, if you revert to your cat form or your, duck form, right? Sprite form, whatever. If you're really some kind of anime creature masquerading as a human, okay, but as long as you're in human form, then moral rules are going to apply to you. It's something that applies to all human beings, right? And maybe even to our relationship with animals, right? We'll get into some theories that talk about that. But the moral norms are way over on the side of, oh God, what happened? Damn it. Sorry. My screensaver just went on and I can't function. Okay. This is also, I'm such a dork. Okay. So this is, we're way over here and we're studying not what people do, how people ought to behave, right? So how the world ought to be. The study of the way the world is, that's science. The study of the way the world ought to be, that's ethics, right? So we've got psychology, ethics. And then we're not just talking about things like etiquette. We're talking about very, very intensely strict rules, meaning is if you're human, morality applies to you, period, right? No getting out of that. There's just no getting out of it. Okay. I sound like I'm preaching. All right, so there are some basic concepts. If you look at the outline that I've provided, there are some basic concepts. Morals. What are morals? Well, there are subjective standards and objective standards, right? So we just talked about subjective standards. Subjective just means that they're mind dependent. So these are technical terms in philosophy. Objective means mind independent and subjective means mind dependent, right? So let me try to explain that. We all have mental states, beliefs, desires, what we think, what we feel, all those things happening in your brain, those are mental states. If I want to play baseball, then I am under an obligation to play by the rules, but only if I want to play baseball, right? So those rules only apply to me if I want them to, right? Now, once you're playing the game, you have to play by the rules, but you can choose, right? So that's subjective. Those are subjective standards. They depend on what you want. There can be standards that depend on what you feel or what you believe. So what you ought to wear, what you, God, I gotta think of some better ones than that. Just how you want to interact with your friends, right? Or what you think about the way people ought to sort of, just be when they're hanging out. Should you be loud, obnoxious, or not, right? So some of that's going to get into the moral domain, but if it's just like, just personality type wants, likes, dislikes, right? So I don't like being in bars where the music is so loud you can't talk. I really don't like that. So I really think I think the world ought to be such that bars don't play music so loud. Just why the fuck do they play music so loud? I don't know, right? But I think that the world should be such that bars don't play music so loud that you can't talk. All right. So that's a subjective moral, right? That depends on what I like and what I don't like. Objective, mind independent means there is some moral standard out there that doesn't depend on what anybody wants, thinks, believes, feels, etc. Okay? So the subjective versus the objective, make sure that you understand the distinction between those two. What we're interested in is we're interested in objective morals in this class. We're going to talk about we're going to talk about some subjective stuff in the next chapter, but really we're going to end up doing a lot about the objective. We're going to talk mostly about the objective domain. Okay, so value. right? Value, we use the terms good and value, good, bad, and value. We use these kind of interchangeably. So value just is, it's a property of goodness or badness. Like something has a value. It's one or the other. It's binary. Okay, it's either good or bad. So you can have, like I have the example I have here is I have a good dog. Okay, so I've assigned a particular value to my dog, and that value is good, right? But there's a difference between value and values, right? So some people say, look, I have a certain set of values that I live by. Okay, well, that's not necessarily, that doesn't mean I'm saying there are good and bad things. That's a different notion. Values with an S. Why we have these terms that are so close and so confusing, I don't know. But so values are things that individuals value. So I value education, right? So I live my life in a very academic way. All right. So that's one of my values. Whatever it is that you take to be an important or central feature of your life, some central thing that you organize your pursuits around, could be religion, could be family, all of these things that people tend to value. Those are values, right? But when we talk about value in ethics, we're talking about good and bad. That's it. Just the binary. That's it. Okay? Make sure you understand that distinction. Okay, ought. I'm going to skip that. You can read that. I'm going to skip ethics. Okay, types of claims. All right, we are almost done. I know I'm almost at about an hour here, and I'm starting to get tired. I usually start to get tired about an hour in. All right. We need to talk about different kinds of claims. Why? Well, it goes back to our argument structure. We're interested in looking at the world and explaining certain kinds of abstract phenomena, like justice. What is it? How does it work? Why should we be interested in it? And so we have to have some evidence, because really philosophy, I'm repeating myself here, and I know I'm repeating myself here, but I'm just sort of giving an overview again, bringing us to date from where we were, to remind you of what we already talked about. We have to provide evidence for the claims that we make if we're interested in truth, right? So a fact is just a statement that is true. That's all a fact is, right? So if somebody claims that something's a fact, what they're claiming is that it's a statement that's true. A lot of what people claim are facts are not facts. God, there's this thing on Twitter. Oh, it drives me nuts. It just, see, when you're a philosopher, you can't go out into the real world and exist normally. It just doesn't happen. So I get on Twitter, and there's this Twitter feed. It's called Facts. And it's just this trite bullshit. It's like every day, all day long. I think it's some kind of bot. I don't know. But every day, all day long, there's just it just throws out facts, random facts, right? From human psychology to geology or whatever, right? A lot of it's really human-centered, though. And I can't, I hate that thing. And I don't follow it. But some people that I've looked at regularly follow and retweet this shit. And I'm just like, that's not a fact. That's false. Oh my God. And these people are like, and I think people like this Twitter thing because it's like inspirational kind of stuff. It's like, it's a fact that people who are telling the truth are usually talking with their hands. Well, that's not a fact. Somebody's claimed that. Somebody's built an entire career off of that idea, but she has no data to support it. There's no evidence to support that claim. Okay? So I get irritated. I get online and I look at this shit and I'm like, these are not facts, and people believe this stuff and it's terrible. Okay? So being a philosopher is going to taking a philosophy class is one thing, but becoming a philosopher, don't do it. You can't live in the real world. Everything is just like, what the fuck? And no, that's wrong. No, you have no evidence. What? Why? Okay, and then you have to delete your Twitter profile and go away for a vacation to some remote cheap, very cheap, because philosophers don't make a lot of money. They go, some very cheap, very remote location. My God. Okay, so, so again, we're using claims when we build our arguments, right? Statements and claims. Oh God, my battery's dying. Oh, fuck. Guys, that you're sticking in here with me is amazing. Like, you have a choice, right? All right, where's my... Hang on. All right. Okay, here we go. And I just tried to shove them in the wrong ears. It's like the story of my life. Okay. All right. So a claim is just something that somebody. It's a statement that somebody's making, like they're asserting. Like when I say I made a claim about something, I'm saying I stated something, and what I want people to believe that it's true, right? So when you claim something, you're offering a statement. You're offering it as if it's a fact. Okay. So you want people to believe that what you're giving them is a fact. So that's what a claim is. So there are different kinds of claims, and it's important to look at what kinds of claims there are, because again, what makes a statement, and a claim just is a statement, right, that you're offering under a certain intention that people believe that it's true, right? But again, statement. In order to know whether or not a statement is true or false, you have to know what kind of claim it is, because there are different domains, there are different types of things that map the world differently, right? So for instance, we're talking a lot about tonight. I have, like tonight, whenever you watch this, in this video, which is very unprofessional. This is the way I am. We've talked a lot about rules for behavior, norms, social norms, rules that govern games, right? These are all rules that govern behavior. They're what we call normative claims, right? So a normative claim is a claim that is going to, there are two different types of normative claims. So one type of normative claim is a prescriptive claim. And a prescriptive claim is going to tell you how you ought to behave, right? So etiquette, full of prescriptive claims. Law, full of prescriptive claims. So a prescriptive claim is just something that tells you how you ought to behave, what you should do, right? So should, ought, same thing. But there's also another type of normative claim, and that's an evaluative claim, right? So remember we talked about value, not values, but value, true or, not true or false, good or bad. There's also a logic definition of value, but we're not going to get in there. So when we're in ethics and we're talking about value, we're talking about good or bad, right? So it's that binary. And an evaluative claim is a claim about something that's either you're ascribing the property of goodness or badness to that thing. So if I say my dog is a good dog, I've made an evaluative claim. I've attributed a value property to my dog, right? So Donald Trump is a bad president. Or I can say Donald Trump is a terrible president, right? He's terrible. And I don't care where you are on the political spectrum. You have to agree. Dude is terrible as a president, right? God. Okay, so that's an evaluative claim. Even though I didn't say good or bad, terrible has really negative connotations, right? That's like the superlative of bad. I mean, it's just tremendously bad. Tremendous is tremendously bad. All right. So there are evaluative claims that don't necessarily say good or bad, but if they are making an attribution of a person or a thing that with a word that has those negative or positive connotations, that's still an evaluative claim. Okay, so I can say Donald Trump is a terrible president. That's an evaluative claim. I'm evaluating him, right? I'm using language that evaluates. I can say that 2020 has been a shit year, right? Come on. 2020 has been a shit year. That is an evaluative claim, okay? Because we all know that shit in the context in which I used it is not good. That's a negative, right? Okay, so that's an evaluative claim. So normative claims are going to be either prescriptive or evaluative. They're either going to tell you what you should do, or they're going to ascribe some goodness or badness to a person or a thing. Now, normative claims are the claims that we're going to be dealing with in ethics. That's the domain of ethics. We deal a lot with the normative and the evaluative claims. But there are also descriptive claims that we use, right? So a descriptive claim is just a claim about the way the world is. Scientists use descriptive claims. They describe the world. So there's an iPad in front of me. That's a descriptive claim. I'm just making a statement, and it happens to be a true statement, so it's a fact. There's a fact here about the world, right? The world is such that there is an iPad right here on my desk in front of me. Okay, that's a descriptive claim. Now, when we're making arguments in ethics, we are often going to use descriptive claims and evaluative claims together to come up with some sort of a moral judgment. Now, when we get to chapter 4, you'll see more how that works. But we're going to use both of these types of claims, but how we assess the truth of those types of claims is going to be different, right? So if I'm assessing the truth of a descriptive claim, I'm just going to go out and I'm going to look and see if the world is the way that the statement says it is, right? So is there really an iPad sitting here in front of me? Well, yeah, I just looked, okay? So I have evidence. So I've just verified that descriptive claim is true. If somebody comes up to me with a normative claim and they say, you should... Somebody put me on the spot here. Like, I haven't been on the spot for an hour. You should not put diapers on your duck. Okay. Why? Well, that's not a very good one. That's not a good one. I don't like that one. Let me come up with something different. Because once you start looking at the evidence for that, there's a lot of descriptive stuff. Okay, back up. You should not have an abortion. Okay, well, what makes that statement true? What's my evidence? Somebody says that. I'm going to be like, okay, well, turn that into a conclusion and give me some premises here, right? I want some evidence for the truth of that claim. If I should not have an abortion, I need to know why. So suppose that somebody's going to give you a claim something like this and support, well, abortion is wrong, right? Okay, well, good. So now I have a premise. What makes that claim true, that abortion is wrong? Now we're in the weeds. That quick, and we're in the weeds, all right? So it depends on your moral theory. It depends on the kinds of things you take into consideration, right? So there are so many different things that you're going to consider when you're looking at whether or not abortion is morally wrong, right? So that's a different way of looking at. You're going to get into the theoretical weeds. I guess that's what I mean when I say you're going to get into the weeds, because there are so many different ways to approach that issue. And you're going to see as we go along in class, there's so many different moral theories that you could use. There are so many different views about what a person is and whether a fetus is a person. And I mean, you can get into, like I said, theoretical weeds here. Just that quick, you're in the rough. Forget it. Your ball's gone. Take a mulligan. So when we're investigating the truth value of normative claims, we're going to be doing kind of a different thing. We're not going to go out and look at the world, right? So when I wanted to verify a descriptive claim, I go look at the world. How is the world? Does this claim match up with the world? In the normative domain, you have to do a whole lot more work, right? It's a lot more difficult in some ways. I mean, it depends on the nature of the claim, but something like abortion is wrong. It's like, okay, we're going to have to do a lot of sort of looking at theories and, debating, and in order to see whether or not that claim is true, whether it's a fact. And even then, people might disagree, right? So So there are different ways of descriptive and normative claims. We verify them in different ways. Okay, so this is why it's important to remember the distinction between them. Another reason it's important to verify or to remember the distinction between them is if you have an argument that has a conclusion that's normative, you got to have at least one normative premise. You cannot draw a normative conclusion from purely descriptive premises. Okay, so remember this. This is really important. You cannot derive an ought from an is. Okay, so you can't say, here's how the world is, therefore this is how the world should be. That's a bad logical move, right? These are two different domains. So if you're going to make a claim, if you're going to argue for the way the world ought to be, you're going to have at least one premise that tells you that's a normative premise. You can't just have purely descriptive claims, okay? So that's another thing you need to remember when we're going through and we're looking at arguments and we're discussing things. If you try to derive a claim about what one ought to do based on what the way the world just is, just a set of descriptive claims, then you're wrong. You're just wrong. That's just wrong. Okay. One last thing, and you guys are probably like, oh my God, thank you for shutting the fuck up. I would really like to shut the fuck up. Okay, value, okay? Now, we talked about value is good and bad, right? Well, there are different types of value, of course. We analyze everything down. We're going to nitpick everything down to the finest level, right? So we have this value. This is a little bit of conceptual analysis. We have this value. What is it? Well, good and bad. All right, well, what kinds of good and bad are there? Well, there are lots of different kinds. We're only interested in a few, though, okay? So the two kinds of value that we're most interested in is intrinsic value and extrinsic value, okay? So your book is going to refer to foundational value. In chapter 1, you're going to see, toward the end, you're going to see this discussion about instrumental value and foundational value. Those terms are going to be subsumed here underneath the distinction between intrinsic and extrinsic. So for those of you who want to, keep it with the book, intrinsic value just is foundational value, and I've made a note of this on the outline. Okay, so they're talking about foundational value, but what they mean is intrinsic value is the same thing. Two different terms, but the same concept. Okay, so intrinsic value is the kind of value that something has just in and of itself, and there are surprisingly few things that have intrinsic value. In fact, there are some people out there who believe there's only one thing that has intrinsic value. So when you start to actually think about, you start really analyzing, as we do in philosophy, start analyzing like what kinds of things are just good in and of themselves. You might have a big list to begin with, but then once you start thinking like, well, but are some of these values instrumental to others? So instrumental value is a type of extrinsic value. So we've got intrinsic value, where something has value just in and of itself. It is just valuable because it is what it is. Now, some people say human life is valuable just because it is. Well, okay, then they're claiming that has intrinsic value. Extrinsic value is the kind of value that something has in virtue of its relationship to something that has intrinsic value, right? So something has extrinsic value. If it has extrinsic value, it doesn't have any value in and of itself, right? It's not a valuable thing. But if it's related to something that has intrinsic value, then it has some kind of value. So the most obvious kind of value that's extrinsic is called instrumental value. So instrumental value is a type of extrinsic value, and it's the most important one that we're going to talk about in ethics. Instrumental value is the kind of value something has it enables you to acquire something of intrinsic value. Okay, so when you think about when you undertake some kind of pursuit. So you set a goal for yourself. You want to get a degree, okay? Or you just want to take a class. You just want to finish a class. You just want to pass a class. Well, there are certain things you have to do in order to pass that class. There are means to that end. An end is just something that we desire. and that we set as an aim. Okay, so that's just an end. And then there are means to that end. Those means are an expenditure of resources. There are lots of different kinds of resources: time, energy, money. Money is huge in the instrumental realm, right? Money doesn't have any intrinsic value. It's just paper, and it's not even backed by gold nowadays, right? Not in the United States. So, so money has no intrinsic value, but it has a shit ton of instrumental value because it can bring you things that make you happy. And don't let anybody say that money can't buy you happiness. It fucking can. That's a crock of shit. Don't believe people who tell you that. That's a lie. So money is instrumentally valued to helping you have happiness. Here's a caveat. They have done research. I'm always going to throw out these like weird research facts. They've done research that has demonstrated that beyond a certain point, money doesn't have it's got diminishing returns. So we don't want to get into economics. Beyond a certain point, having more money isn't going to make you any happier, but there is a level at which there's like a maximal amount of happiness that money can bring you. And they have identified this. I mean, the things that people study. This is great. This is great. This is what I want to do for a living. I just want to study, like, what's the perfect amount of money that people need to have in order to be happy, right? So they discovered that if you live in a household where the household income is $150,000 a year, which is like 3 times the national average, then you have increasing happiness. As you earn more money through up to $150,000 a year, your happiness increases along with your increasing salary. But it caps at $150,000 a year. So people who make more than that are not any happier than people who make that amount. Okay, cool. But from 50 to 150, that's a big gap. So don't let anybody say money can't buy you happiness. It fucking can, and research proves that it can. From wherever you are on the low end up to 150, that's a lot of increasing happiness. I would love to go on fucking vacation, I can tell you that. Ugh. I can't afford it, right? I can't afford a vacation. But going on vacation would make me very happy. So money can bring you something of intrinsic value. Happiness has intrinsic value. Pleasure has intrinsic value, right? So money is the perfect example of something that only has instrumental value. It's only extrinsically valuable. It has value because it's related to, because it stands in a certain kind of relation to something of intrinsic value. Namely, money can help facilitate happiness. Okay? And that's all I'm going to say for today. If you got through this, God bless you. My normal lectures are not going to be this long. I'm going to try to keep them to like 45 minutes, maybe an hour. I did a little extra today because I'm trying to cram like 2 things, what I would normally do on a first day of class plus the lecture for chapter 1. So it's a little bit longer. I'm sorry that with my technical craziness and my basic dorkiness. Sorry, the dorkiness is not going to go away. It's here to stay. So you're just going to have to put up with the dorkiness. But hopefully I will be a little bit more tech savvy as I go through and produce these videos for you. So that's it. Abrupt end. Talk for an hour and 20 minutes straight, and then, okay, the end. All right. So, bye.